And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome again to Let's Talk Gardens, the webinar series from Smithsonian Gardens. I am delighted to introduce our presenter today, Dr. Holly Walker, the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Program Coordinator for Delaware's Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. Welcome, Holly, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So as Katie said, I am Dr. Holly Walker, and for many of you who are on, you may not realize this, but I actually used to work at the Smithsonian Gardens prior to coming into my current role. I was actually the plant health specialist. I did a lot of work around the gardens, and I'll have to say that it was always one of the best experiences of my life and really paved the way for me to be able to continue to do good work, away from the Smithsonian Gardens. So I always want to say thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead. So as Katie said, I am the Chesapeake Bay Program Coordinator for the state of Delaware. And what that means is that I actually oversee one of the programs here at DNREC, which is Delaware's Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. I'm housed inside what is considered the Division of Watershed Stewardship, and my program that I oversee is the Chesapeake Bay Implementation Program. And I just always have to say that I would not be able to do the work that I do without the amazing people that I work with. We have such a great team of environmental scientists, engineers, planners. These people put so much heart and energy into what they do, what all of us do. And when it comes down to trying to protect our habitats, our local ecosystems, our waterways. And part of that work includes a wide variety of things, which include being, outreach education specialists, doing site visits, talking to public, doing environmental education, beach cleanups, tree plantings. I mean, we get our hands dirty, but we're there for our public. We're there to serve our residents and our communities to make sure that they have what they need to do good work around their own communities and their landscapes. I did want to point out one of the pictures up here on the far right corner. For those of you who have ever been able to get over to the Delaware Botanical Gardens, that was a visit that we took. One of our sister programs was actually able to help with funding for a green infrastructure project there. And if you get a chance, come over. They have a beautiful rain garden that is established next to the parking lot area to collect runoff from our parking lot. So definitely a really great program full of great people. So I want to talk a little bit about the Chesapeake Bay Watershed and where Delaware fits in that. But I know that a lot of you are not from Delaware necessarily. You may be from the Mid-Atlantic region. You may be from much further away. I want to tell you that a lot of these things apply to watersheds outside of the Chesapeake Bay. But for us specifically in this area, the Chesapeake Bay is very critical to our landscapes and our waterways. Delaware is one of 7 states and jurisdictions that are involved in the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Partnership. You can see from the map here on the side, and I hope you can see that all right, what encompasses the Chesapeake Bay Watershed. So these are all the lands that drain into that Chesapeake Bay water. And it, like I said, it impacts such a variety of different landscapes. It touches forests and homes and urban areas, DC, ag, all of those sorts of things. So again, it's kind of a wide encompassing space, even if you don't feel like your state actually touches the Chesapeake Bay itself. Delaware itself in particular is in a unique location. We are on the eastern shore, so we're kind of the smaller subsegment of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And it's about 1/3 of the state drains into the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and we're what's considered a headwater state. So again, we don't really touch much of the tidal areas. We have 2 small areas in which we actually have tidal waters that go into the Chesapeake Bay, but most of our waters are non-tidal. But again, that's where a lot of the water systems originate, and you'll see why that's very important. But one of the best things about the Chesapeake is that it is just home to many people, plants, and animals. So as part of our commitment to protecting the Chesapeake Bay, all of those of us who have agreed to this partnership, a lot of the work that we do is in preservation and reduction of pollutants. So again, we need to preserve not just the water and the lands directly adjacent to it, but some of the lands that go out a little bit further that drain into those. And we need to protect those habitats and do what we can to restore any of the ones that are being disrupted through different types of practices. One of the biggest things that we address, as I said before, is dealing with pollution loads. There's a lot of different types of pollution that can enter our bay. And we're specifically focused on usually 3 types of pollution. Not that there aren't many other ones, but the ones that really rise to the top in our initiatives have to do with reduction of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. And these pollutions can have really negative impacts on, not just the animals and plants that live there, but on just like the communities that live next to them. So, we're all working together to try and see what we can do to help offset some of these pollution loads. One of the big things I want to point out is, to address this, we need to deal with the different types of pollution. And like I said before, we're looking at that nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. Now, we generally tend to characterize that in 2 different ways. Point source, which is where we know where that pollution load is coming from, and that's often associated with wastewater. We know exactly where it's coming from. There's usually a pipe or a location or a facility in which it's being addressed. But then there's this other type of pollution. It's called non-point source pollution. And you can kind of get the idea from that name that it's not something that we're able to pinpoint very easily. And so that non-point source pollution is the type of pollution that comes a lot of times when we have runoff. So what we most associate with runoff. And it can come from a variety of places. It can be runoff from your roof. It can be runoff from the streets. It can be runoff from lawns. It can be runoff from fields. And that's not to demonize anybody. It happens every time you have a rain event, a flood event, anything like that that moves water across the surface. You're going to have this non-point source runoff type of pollution. So, it's something that we're just aware of, and it just can be a little bit more challenging when we have something like point source pollution where we can point to that location and say, yep, that's where we need to address this. Whereas when we're looking at a very landscape-wide sort of like, how do we address pollution issues? That non-point source is just a little bit more challenging. But that said, it's not an impossible task. And so one of the best things that we have available to us is over the years, we've developed what we call these best management practices. And these best management practices help us to implement things that we know help improve our water quality, help improve our habitats. And so the good thing is that some of these are very easy practices, and they're ones that you could implement even in a very small scale or at a very small scale in your backyards, in your communities, those sorts of things. So, it's not an impossible task. It just requires everybody kind of doing their part to help create a better system out there to kind of collect this pollution load that's going in. So I'm actually going to talk about 2 of Delaware's programs that we have created in the last not quite 2 years. We have most of these programs came out in 2023. They're incentive programs because we wanted to make these more available to homeowners, landowners, and communities. A lot of efforts and initiatives at the Chesapeake Bay scale often are scaled up for large restoration work, but we wanted people to feel like they could participate in a way that is effective in their own communities and get people involved. So, like I said, I'm going to talk about these 2 programs that we have. One of them is the Delaware Community Conservation Assistance Program, which we often refer to as DCAP, and our Buffer Incentive Program. And again, this is just to get you thinking about what you can do in your own space, in your own backyard, to help improve water quality and habitat around you. So the first program I'm going to go over is the Delaware Community Conservation Assistance Program, or DCAP, as I stated before. DCAP's kind of a nice one in the sense that it's a combination of different practices, and I'll show you all of the different practices that we have, and just so you can kind of see and think about what might actually suit you in your area, or maybe something that you can implement at a local community or house of worship, any of those sorts of types of places. But one of the nice things about this program is that it's meant to help in many different ways. First of all, we provide technical assistance, and that's not just to people in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So I should point out to you, Delaware has a lot of different programs, and we have 4 watersheds that we address different issues with. All of these programs are just specific to that Chesapeake Bay watershed, but that does not mean that we don't work across those watershed lines with other partners in the state, like our conservation districts and our NGOs, to try and make this system whole. But for our Chesapeake Bay watershed, that's why we have these 2 programs. And that technical assistance goes across state lines. Even though we're really focused on the Chesapeake, we want to make sure that any homeowner, landowner, community assistance person, or planner has the knowledge that they need to make good decisions about these types of practices. The other side of it is sometimes these practices can be very expensive, and landowners and homeowners are a little bit nervous to put forward that kind of money, not knowing what it's going to look like at the end of the day or how effective it's going to be. And so these incentive programs are there to either fully or partially reimburse the completion of these projects. And that includes, paying for site prep, that includes paying for the getting the materials and putting the materials like out there, whether it's planting, whether it's seeding, whether it's those sorts of things that we need to do. But it's meant to make it so that this is not painful for that landowner financially. It doesn't feel like a financial burden. So it's a really neat program that we have. And we're finding that we're able to, in many cases, pay fully for it. So again, it's a no risk, no kind of cost situation for homeowners. So this is what I really want to talk to you guys about, because again, this program is specific to Delaware. And if you're not in Delaware, that doesn't always necessarily help you. But I do also want to point out, and I'll show a slide later, that there are other resources, and other states actually have very similar programs, but theirs might be a little bit different. But the things I want to get you thinking about is, what can you do in your own backyard? What can you do in your community spaces that are really going to have an important impact on water quality? And so we focus specifically on what we consider 9 best management practices that are easier to implement at that kind of scale, that can really improve water quality, improve habitat. And I'm just going to list them out right here, and you can see them obviously on the image, but like urban forest buffers, that's going to be a large one. Constructed wetlands, you'd be surprised. We actually get a lot of interest for constructed wetlands, and have had some success in getting constructed wetlands in people's backyards. Vegetative channels, so this is often like bioretention, bioswales, those sorts of things. There's a lot of different ways that you can implement that. It's a lot of like smaller stormwater practices. Conservation landscaping, which is one of our biggest ones. And I'm going to go a little bit more into that one because it is such a popular one. And it is really what this program was originally based around. We have things like rain gardens, urban nutrient management. Those of you who are close to Delaware, you might be familiar with our livable lawns, but I'm sure your own states have very similar types of programs. Individualized tree plantings, which are different from urban forest buffers. So when I talk about a buffer, I'm usually talking about plants that are along any sort of water body, and I'll go more in depth with that because we have a buffer incentive program that also adds with this one. And then the final one is rain barrels. So again, like even if you don't have a lot of space, just simple things as adding a rain barrel can have a lot of impact. And we're actually working right now to do like a big rain barrel giveaway in our area, just to kind of get people interested in it. We have a lot of programs where we have people painting their rain barrels. We just have a lot of cool programs around it. But I just want to show you that this stuff is not impossible, and that there are programs out there to help and assist you. But I know for a lot of people, this is very overwhelming, and you say, yeah, that's great, but I don't even know where to begin. And that's part of what this program is about. This is part of the work that we do as environmental scientists, planners, and engineers. So just a little bit of an overcap like of how we run our program, just to show you like what goes into doing something like this. We usually get contacted by the public, somebody from the public who's interested. They can go either through our website, which I'll have up on a slide a little bit later for you, or they can just call us, or through many different means, we can find out that somebody is interested. Once we know they're interested, we actually send staff out to the site, and they will meet with the homeowner, landowner, community planner, and we'll talk about what's going on. We'll talk about like, are they having flooding issues? Are there concerns with just mowing constantly, or, sorts of things like that? And what are the limitations for that homeowner? Maybe they live in an HOA and there are certain things we need to consider. But we'll go back and forth and discuss different options with them and figure out what is the best fit for the site that they have. And then we'll take that information, those pictures, the aerials and everything like that, and we'll develop a design. We'll take that design to our team of experts. So we have a steering committee that's made up of experts in our area, and they can look at that and say, I think this needs to be moved further away from the house, or this might cause these sorts of issues. How are we going to address that? Once we come to a finalized design plan and confirmed it with the homeowner, then we'll begin the process of reaching out to local contractors for installation. And one of the best things that we've noticed is that there's a bigger increase in contractors, landscaping and construction contractors who are doing more of this ecological kind of work. And so we really try to focus on those contractors who can do this kind of work, who have experience with it. And we've been pleasantly surprised to see how many people have really come out of the woodwork. And we'll always work with contractors that homeowners are more comfortable with. But at the same time, it's nice to get their set of eyes on things as well, because a lot of times they're going to be with the homeowner through this whole process and want to make sure that it's comfortable. Once the project has been completed and we get somebody out there just to verify that everything's in the ground, it's the way that it's supposed to be, the homeowner will receive a reimbursement for any of the funds. So a lot of times there is an upfront cost, but lately we've been actually able to go ahead and pay for all of that stuff ahead of time. But if there is a reimbursement portion of it, we will. And then the last thing is that we ask that for any of our practices that you keep it in place for at least 5 years. And the reason for that is it usually takes 5 years for most of these practices, less so with rain barrels, but with most of these practices to really become established and start working fully the way that they need to. So we want to make sure that they're functioning the way they need to and that they're being maintained in those first 5 years while they become established. So this was actually updated just last month. We had a big interagency WIP meeting, which is Watershed Implementation Plan meeting, where we meet with all of our stakeholders in the state to talk about our programs and how successful that they have been. And like I said, this program actually only came out in 2023. So, we're not even fully 2 years into having this program out, but we were discussing how successful and how interested the public is in this program. We did break out the interest based on our watersheds. You can see that most of it is in the Chesapeake, and we do target our efforts in the Chesapeake. But we were really pleasantly surprised to see that a lot of the other watersheds were also interested in it. And we're working with some of our other groups, like I said, with our conservation districts to create sister programs to this outside of the Chesapeake so that we can expand these efforts across the whole state. You can look at, so BMP stands for Best Management Practices, and you can see that conservation landscaping is one of our most popular. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And then following up behind that is rain gardens and tree plantings. Rainwater harvesting refers to our rain barrels, and to be determined, a lot of homeowners don't know. They don't know what would be good. They just know that they want to do something, and they'd really like to get somebody out there and kind of discuss what their options are. And obviously, we're very open to having multiple best management practices on a property. And what's neat is we've had a couple of homeowners where we've put a practice in, they're like, I really love this. I think this is great. I want to expand. How do I expand this? And then we go from there and we keep working with them to kind of keep moving in the right direction in terms of, well, you did this. Well, have you considered this now? So I think it's nice to do it that way. Also, it allows us to take appropriately sized chunks of like how to get these practices in the ground and not try to do too much at once. But at the same time, if it makes sense to do it all at one time, we will. All right. So I didn't put a picture of our website. I will highly recommend that if you are interested in this information, go to our website. You can very easily Google us. And like I said, I'll actually have a link on the end of this presentation for you to go to. But if you go to DNREC or Delaware and then put like DCAP or, Chesapeake Bay Implementation Program, you'll come up on our website. And like I said, there's 9 different best management practices that we're really focused on for this particular program. And so in conjunction with one of our contractors, Tetra Tech, they were actually able to design these 2-page fact sheets for every single one of these best management practices. And what I like about these is that they're very good when we go out to the public and we go out to these communities to talk about the practices, and it kind of really breaks things down for them. It talks about what the practice is. So example, here is your rain garden, and it really gives like a diagram. It explains things like how you need it to be 10 feet from your basement so that you don't have water accumulating next to your house foundation. It'll talk about the different soils and things that you need. It'll talk about what are the limitations. When does this not work? What are the costs associated with it? What are the benefits? Also maintenance, because maintenance is always a very big question about this. It's like, it's great when it goes in, but how is it going to look in a couple of years? So, I think it's great that there's just these fact sheets and they can be used by anybody. So I really highly recommend, please, if you think that you want to do any of this kind of work where you live, go ahead, pull these, they're PDFs, they're linked in that website, pull them off, use them. They're a great starting point for having conversations. So definitely a good resource. And like I said, rain gardens are one of our more popular ones. They're really kind of a neat one. We do a lot of these around community areas here, which is nice. And they can really be adaptable. And so actually, as part of this series in which we were making these fact sheets, we also wanted to make sure that we could show people kind of what a plan would look like if we wanted to implement this sort of project. And so then we created these templates. So Tetra Tech, our contractor, again, did a fantastic job working with us to discuss what we wanted to see in these templates. And these are great because, like I said, we can literally go to a homeowner, to a community planner and say, okay, this is what a potential project would look like. So this is an example of a rain garden in a small residential area, maybe a small commercial setting sort of thing. And what it talks about is, what do you need to consider? What could this look like? Where does it need to be placed? We also have different examples of plant lists for both sunny locations and shady locations. And these actually just have very short lists, but then we have a comprehensive full plant list kind of for our area. So again, if you're going to do this outside of this mid-Atlantic region, you need to kind of look at what plants are more appropriate for where you're going to be. But I think this makes it a lot easier for people to envision what this could look like on their own property and what's going to go into it, and to really customize what they're looking for. So I think that that just makes it so much easier when you're trying to get these kind of practices on the ground. And again, for a lot of people, this is their first time doing these kinds of practices. So they really don't know, and they need you to help kind of guide them through it, give them options, let them kind of mull it over and go from there. And so that's a lot of what our technical assistance also provides is, you know, the back and forth, the conversations about plants, about locations, what's going to make the most sense, soil samples. We look at your LIDAR, so that's your elevations, like where do you have low points in your yard, so those sorts of things. And it all helps us inform where we want to put these practices and what makes the most sense for you. And a lot of these are really great when you're trying to mitigate things like flooding that's happening, especially here in Delaware. We're very lowlands, we're very flat, water doesn't move off of properties very well. Every rain we get, a lot of people see that they have a lot of wet patches that just can't really do anything with. And it's no point mowing it. It just gets to be a weedy mess. So let's use that space. Let's do something good with it. Let's filter that water, that sediment, those pollutions, loads that are going out, and then create habitat around it. I also want to show like each of these templates is actually scalable. So like I said, that one before was a small like residential sort of setting, but we also want to show people what it would look like if they wanted to get involved with like at a larger community scale. So this would be like a small park sort of setting. This could be a VFW, a moose lodge, something like that, or school. These are all options for different ways to kind of scale these programs. And again, it provides that same kind of information. It's like, what do you need to consider in this environment? What are some things that you need to be aware of in terms of like, I was trying to think about this, but like just, you know, where do you place plants for different needs? And how do you make sure that you're putting the right plant given your specific environment? As I was saying beforehand, in some residential areas, you might struggle because HOAs have certain limitations. So we can kind of adapt it as you need to from there. So again, plant lists, but these are really great resources. These aren't on our website just yet, but if people are interested in them, please reach out to me. I have copies of all of them. We're happy to share this information. It's not in any way meant to be, you know, just an internal resource. This is what we want the public to have. This is what we want to help you do the projects that you have, not just in Delaware, but, you know, anywhere. So I know this doesn't look like much, but we were actually very proud of these two projects. They both went in this fall, or, you know, late summer, fall. The one on the left is a wetland in somebody's backyard. And what's neat is that we actually used some of the trees that had to be taken down as snags and as material to build on in that wetland. And I promise, I hope to have updated pictures for when it actually gets blooming this spring. It was seeded in with a native grass and pollinator mix around the edges. It should be really beautiful when it's all up and grown up, but it's such a unique feature, and it was just really amazing that this person was so interested in having this wetland in their backyard. The other one on the right is actually a newly planted rain garden. And again, the designs can be really unique. I mean, it really customized to fit what your landscape is. We had a contractor come in, we looked at different sites for the rain gardens, and we determined that this was our best site for collecting water from both the runoff from the house, but also from flooding that was coming in from a local ditch. And, you know, it's neat because, again, you're going to have that beautiful like pollinator planting, but also some native grasses. There's just a lot of different elements that are going in here. And it's just really nice to see these projects hit the ground. And like I said, I can't wait. We're still in the relatively new program. I can't wait to see what they look like when they're fully grown up. So as I said before, conservation landscaping is one of the most popular best management practices that we have. And a lot of people always ask me, like, what does that actually mean? And so for us, this is a particular one where if you have land that is traditionally turf grass, and you're doing your regular, fertilizing, fungicides, pesticides, those sorts of things, and you want to take that out of turf, then you would want to do something like conservation landscaping. And so what will go in, and it is a process. I mean, but we help with the site prep and everything is we'll kill off the grass, and then we'll go in and we'll put a native plant species mix in. And it can be really adaptable to what you need. If you would prefer more of a grass, like a native grass look, we can definitely go that direction. But a lot of people want these pollinator meadows. So a lot of times when I talk about conservation landscaping, I usually refer to them as our pollinator meadows, because that's what people really think about when they're thinking about. They're like, I want to take not all of, but maybe a chunk of my yard that I'm tired of mowing, and I just want to turn it into a pollinator meadow. So what does that cost? What's my maintenance look like? What are the benefits of it? That sort of thing. And so that's what this is really designed for. And that, like I said, is our most popular one that we get a lot of requests for. And it's also one of the easiest ones that we have. And so we actually have two different designs here specifically, not so much on the small scale, large scale, but more on what is acceptable in the area in which you live. So this first one for conservation landscaping, this is for short grass. So say that you live in an HOA or something like that, and they really don't like that weedy appearance, not weedy, but we all know that native plants can sometimes have a very rambunctious look to it. And, it's interesting. And for plant lovers, we really enjoy it, but not everybody does. So instead, we created a template in which you can create kind of these short grasses, short plants that aren't going to have quite that wild look to them. It's going to be a more conservative look, but still provide that same function and still be, beneficial to pollinators, creating habitat, beneficial insects, water filtration, all of those sorts of things. So that's a really nice way to kind of like adapt this to the needs of people. And we were always listening to our landowners, especially as we worked a lot with HOAs that had restrictions on like grass heights and those sorts of things. But we also have a template that shows if you want that more traditional pollinator meadow that's just sweeping with tall grasses, tall plants, butterflies everywhere sort of situation, what does that look like for you? And we have that as well. So I think it's great to have these different ways to showcase that these practices can look a lot of different ways, but still be functional, still do the things that we need them to, and still support a lot of habitat and water quality. All right. So I do want to take a moment and talk about our livable lawns real quick. So not everybody is able to take out turf grass. Not everybody wants to take out turf grass. There are places in which it's beneficial for you to have turf grass, and grass can still very much function as a filter. It doesn't have quite the same root depth that a lot of our native plants do, but if you still want to have that grass, there are at least things that you can do to kind of make sure that you're not contributing to that runoff factor. And so we have that through our urban nutrient management program, which is also called our livable lawns. And it's neat because it's a program where essentially we've looked at like, when should you be timing your fertilizer? What are the rates you should be looking at? And just again, this is just designed to help reduce that runoff from getting into your local waterways, to still have that grass, but also make sure that you're not contributing to local pollution loads. So this is a program we really promote, and we just, again, we know that everybody's environment is different, and what you want and need it for is different. You may have small kids and dogs, and you still want that grass, and there's a lot of alternatives out there. But if you want to, there are ways to still do it and make sure that you're, helping what's local to you. I know when I was still at the Smithsonian Gardens, we had the bee lawns, and I think that's such a neat alternative too, to have your grass, but also incorporate some other species that help promote pollinators. So there's a lot of options out there, and that's all part of, again, this technical assistance that we give is let's discuss, let's figure out what you've got out there. So to wrap up with the DCAP side of things, that first link is the Delaware Community Conservation Assistance page, so our program page. So that's our Delaware one specifically. And like I said, this has all of that information in terms of those fact sheets, who's eligible, those sorts of things. And then it has contact information if you want to get any of those templates for the scalable designs and the plant list for our region. But I also want to point out that, DCAP was not the original founder. There are a lot of programs all over the country. These are just a couple of ones that I found locally, sort of locally, that also have very similar programs. Like I said, they're going to be different depending on where you live and what they're able to cover, but check out what's near you. But also realize that, like I said, any of these pages, and ours in particular, you can use as a resource and a starting point to have these conversations. So I'm going to move on to our next program. Just making sure I'm still good on time. So the other program that we started around the same time was originally our forest buffer program. Now we've changed the name of that to just our buffer incentive program. And part of that is that as much as we want to do tree buffers, and we do quite a bit of tree buffers and tree plantings in this state, it's a big priority for us. We also realized that we were missing a niche there for grass buffers. So I don't know how familiar with you guys are with this idea of tax ditches. It's something that's very common here in Delaware, which there were large ditches that were created all across the state to drain some of the lands for agricultural and development. Obviously, there can be negative repercussions for that, but it's a long-term part of our history here in Delaware. And every homeowner who has a property that drains onto one of those ditches actually pays part of a tax, it is a tax ditch, into it to help maintain it. They're very important. We do not want them to flood. It can cause really large scale issues if they do. So as I said, we have to maintain them, but they're also a really good opportunity for us because we have these pathways of waterways that intersect all throughout our state, especially here in like the southwestern corner, that we can utilize as natural filters for a lot of the water and the runoff that's coming in. So we're trying to utilize as much of that is. But it's interesting because these ditches and also streams and wetlands, they have a lot of private landowners, whether they're agricultural or residential, who are adjacent to them. And so a big part of our buffer program is to really talk to these homeowners, to talk to these people and say, hey, I see that you have this tax ditch along your property, or you have this stream or wetland. Would you like to increase its ability to filter out nutrients going into the water? But hey, we're going to pay you for it. So that's what our buffer program is about. And I always want to point out that buffers are essentially any trees, vegetative plantings that are along a waterway. So like I said, it's a linear strip, wooded, vegetated, that are picking up nutrients, that are helping that groundwater to be filtered. So again, acting as natural filters. But what's great about these is that they're also increasing habitat, they're increasing space for pollinators, they're mitigating flood, they're mitigating erosion. So they have a lot of benefits to them just by adding more plant material next to your waterways. So again, this buffer incentive program was designed to be very flexible in terms of rural and urban landowners. Originally, it was more for rural, but we've definitely realized that there's a need and increase for urban landowners for us. This program's a little different than the other one. We cover everything. It's upfront 100%. We cover the site prep, the materials, the plantings, the maintenance, and then on top of it, after you've done all that, you actually get an incentive payment for how much land you're able to donate into this cause. So it's a one-time payment, incentive payment, but it does make it a little bit easier, but it's nothing out of pocket for the landowner. And then on top of it, they get a little bit of a boost on to I guess if they want to use it for maintenance or if they want to use it in some other way, but it's just to reward people for being able to do this type of work because it's not easy to sometimes give up land, in perpetuity. Now we do ask that people, again, maintain it for at least 5 years in maintenance, but again, we're also bringing in groups to help with that maintenance, whether it's contractors. We work a lot with groups like the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance has a team of green interns. They're phenomenal. These are usually college students who are coming in, who are learning about these habitat restoration work. They have a great knowledge base and they get to interact with people and learn more about doing this kind of work. And maintenance is a big part of it. Being able to keep invasives out, to make sure that things are establishing the way that they need to, and just plant identification. These are all great skills for them. So we really try to be collaborative with the work that we're doing so that we're connecting students with the community, with the environment. As I said before, it is an incentive program. Unlike DCAP, this one actually pays people out, and we've broken down this incentive payment. And again, this is something you should look at your own local community scale. See if your state or your county provides something similar to you. But for us in particular, like when we have tree buffers, if it's what we consider a normal wide tree buffer, which is about 35 feet wide, which is a lot, but if you're in an agricultural setting, that might not be an issue. You might have entire sides of your field that are lining up against a wetland that are just too wet. In that case, we give you up to $1,000 an acre that you're able to put into it. And we can drop these down to as small as 1/4 of an acre in terms of dividing out the payments. If 35 feet is too wide for you, but you happen to live on a stretch right along a ditch or a pathway or something that has water on it, you can do what's considered a narrow buffer, and then it drops down to 500 an acre. So again, it's like you're not having to pay for any of the cost of materials, any of the cost for site prep, any of the cost for maintenance. In addition to it, we're going to reward you for doing good practices. And like I said, we also have the grass buffers. This one's super easy. Like I said, it's native grasses or pollinator plantings, those sorts of things. They're going into it. It's really adaptable. Actually, in some cases, we've talked to farmers about putting in hay if they need to. The biggest thing is it only needs to be mowed once or twice a year just to maintain the plant population and to reduce weeds, but also it's not to have any input such as fertilizers, fungicides, any of those sorts of things. It needs to be a natural buffer that is maintaining itself that way. And again, we did templates for this as well. So here's a really cool example of a riparian forest buffer in an urban residential setting. So you might luck out that you live really close to a stream or a ditch or a tax ditch or something like that. And it just kind of allows you to kind of visualize what that's going to look like. You know, a lot of times with certain communities, like they want certain sight lines. Particularly, it's interesting when we do these with ag settings and farms, we want to make sure that what we're planting next to the field isn't going to shade out the crops that are immediately next to it. So it's scalable in terms of, do we want to do vegetative grasses, move into a multi-layer of shrubs, moving into a multi-layer of trees? And that's the thing, is we're trying to create a true habitat here while also doing all this good work. So it's kind of neat to see how we have all of these different programs. And again, we want to make sure that it's scalable to what people need. And adaptable. You know, these programs don't do any good if they don't meet the needs of the homeowners and the landowners, but also to get people engaged. So you know that the space that you have can have a large impact on the environment around you. And one of the biggest things we talk a lot with communities is as we meet with people and we get projects on their site, we find that their neighbors soon become interested as well and want to do these practices. And what that does is that creates this contiguous, this connected landscape of habitat, this connected landscape of water quality best management practices. And it's going to be patchwork, but that's that's a starting point. And it can connect corridors for different animals. It can connect corridors. It can help cool down our water systems. It can do all this good work. And it's just amazing to me, like, how easy it is sometimes to do it. But again, after speaking with a lot of homeowners, I've realized that just that starting point, most people don't know where to begin. They're not experts in this area. And that's where we come in. We want to be your experts. We want to be the ones who come out to you, talk about this stuff. But again, that's why these resources are so important, is if I'm not there and I can't help you, then I want you to be able to take this and go to a contractor or a local conservation district and say, I'm really interested in doing this kind of work. How do I start? And so the last part of this is I'm going to, again, give you guys some resources in terms of places that you can go. Again, the Delaware Buffer Incentive Program page, we have all of our resources on there. If you need anything, pull it off of there, but also look at what's around you in terms of your own programs within your own state. I remember when I was in DC, one of my coworkers got involved with the River Smart Homes shade tree planting. And I thought that was such a cool program. And at the time, I didn't know about the stuff that was going on in Delaware. And to be fair, we didn't have these programs yet in Delaware. One of the best things has been, since I've come on here, is being able to get these programs out, to start meeting with homeowners, to get them involved, to make sure that they feel like they have a say in their environment and in their local water systems. So with that, I'm actually going to be quiet and take any questions if you have it, but I'm happy. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you to say. And also, just like I said, please reach out if you have any questions. That's what I'm here for.